Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll have a time to introduce Colson Ctr and the program to our Chinese Christian audience. And some of them are pastors, elders, and co-leaders, and some of them from China. So I've been studying with the Colson Ctr many years ago with Congressman Bill Redmond, and truly blessed, and opened my eyes and really think for a long time what make America so different. And it's, it's Bible, it's biblical worldview. And so for a long time, myself included, Chinese Christians get confused or not very clear. Like last time we talked to Bill Redmond saying, normal regular church activity doesn't guarantee you have a biblical worldview.
That's right.
That's a shock to me. That's, I'm a pastor, I'm leading, missions, and then I still don't understand.
Yeah.
So, but through all this years conversation, gradually understand. I would like to hear from you, share with our audience, what is biblical worldview?
Yeah.
In relation to Colson Ctr, and especially you are in charge of the Colson Fellow program.
Yeah, thank you very much. In short, we use this term biblical worldview for lack of anything better. But in reality, we have to think of biblical worldview as a full-orbed biblical theology that not only helps us understand how we appropriate a right relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and that in that relationship, we begin to experience a reconciliation of the relationship with ourselves. This is where the Lord comes and begins to heal the psychological, emotional woundedness that inevitably result from the fall, restoring us to our full humanity. And then there's this third relationship that moves into, we experience reconciliation with others. How do we live in right relationship to others? And then finally, the fourth relationship, which sin ruins and Christ is restoring, is to live in right relationship with creation. Well, for about the last 150 years, our theology has only focused on those first two relationships primarily. How we appropriate a personal relationship with God through Christ Jesus.
Okay. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So the emphasis of theology was narrowed primarily to soteriology, salvation, personal salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there is this therapeutic dimension in which we begin to experience this healing. And I would describe this as our personal theology or private theology, the things that matter to us personally.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've done is we have eliminated the public theology that deals with God's truth of all of reality as it applies to everything outside of ourselves and our relationship to those things. So again, that's our relationship to other people, to the society, but also to creation and culture and all of the things that inhabit creation. That God has established creational norms. He has structured the world and creation to function in a very specific way. And that includes everything from marriage, one man, one woman, mothering, fathering, working in unison and partnership together to procreate, to be fruitful and to multiply and to bring offspring into existence, new human beings into existence, and to together to jointly fulfill the creation mandate. To subdue the earth, to cultivate the earth, in other words.
Right.
But in the absence of this public theology, we don't really know how to do that anymore. And beginning about 150 years ago, as I said earlier, we began to see this worldview foundation, which transformed our society economically, politically, technologically, scientifically, in every way, because the Christian life and worldview shaped all of those categories of human activity. And it shaped it in a way that was consistent with the Bible. What makes biblical worldview so difficult at times is that these ideas about reality are often derived from those things that are implied in Scripture and not necessarily explicit in Scripture. So you're not going to have a detailed dissertation in the Bible about economic systems per se that would be applicable in the 21st century. Medicine, science, technology, all these things. But what you do find are the foundational theologies that are explicit, such as the image of God, the Imago Dei. And it's from that, the implications of being made in the image of God, that Christian theologians and philosophers and thinkers throughout the centuries have laid out a foundation of Christian anthropology, and from that developed conceptions about what would be an appropriate economic system for man made in the image of God, in which work is valued, human dignity is valued, work has dignity, and we're made to work. And work is one of those ways in which we make ourselves, practically speaking, available to the service of our neighbors. So worldview is really that the public aspect of biblical theology, or the public dimensions of Christ's rule and reign over the reality of creation.
So in the history, because you mentioned about 150 years, this time span, do you imply that in the history, maybe early in the forming of the United States, there are collectively some kind of a framework of public theology?
Yes.
And now we get lost. Is that what you try to?
Yes. Yeah, very much. So throughout Western civilization, for really the last 1600 years, the Christian life and worldview formed the consensus worldview of Western civilization. And so it shaped the West's conceptions of science and technology. And science is a good example. So most civilizations had a scientific approach, or a study of science. What distinguished Christianized science, and that's probably a better way to say it, because I'm not talking about European culture, I'm talking about the influence of Christianity. So in the Christian worldview, there was this understanding that God was an orderly God. He made creation in an orderly way. Therefore, creation could be understood. And so this mindset drove Western scientists, Christianized scientists, to no longer simply observe natural phenomenon, but pursue answers to the questions of why those phenomenon occurred. And they believed that those questions, or answers to those questions, were available simply because the creation was created orderly. And this gave rise to a very effective scientific method that is what helps us put men on the moon. Because it dealt with the finite reality, and it sought to answer the question as to why a particular phenomenon occurs, rather than simply observing the phenomenon, as did most other scientific endeavors.
So in that case, I guess in the history, there will be vast, all kinds of papers and journals and, the memoir and books and about the Christians' views.
Yes.
They are dealing with the science, medical, and education, but we don't see one textbook. We don't see one set of training book. Is that the Colson Ctr trying to do?
Well, what we are trying to do is to help modern Christians recover this historic understanding, rooted in the biblical principle that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to Jesus Christ. He is ruling and reigning over everything. And Abraham Kuyper puts this nicely when he says there is not one square inch in the universe over which Jesus Christ does not shout mine. In other words, he is concerned about every single aspect of his creation. God is concerned about every single aspect of his creation.
Right.
He creates man. He puts man on earth, and he gives man a commission, and that is to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And when we use this term subdue, I'm obviously using the English translation, that can have negative connotations, but subdue could be better understood as cultivate. So God is giving something, creation, that he creates out of nothing. And he tells man, he charges man with the responsibility to cultivate this earth, to make more out of it than what he has created out of nothing, but we're making it out of what God has given. So we bring the fullness of God's creation into being when we cultivate the earth. So it is plausible to understand that the charge given to Adam and Eve would be to go and build civilization, to build buildings, architecture, music, art, all of these things that we do in our fallen state and do pretty well. And so it's recovering that original charge and bringing it into the present, and reestablishing God's creational norms, his structure for the way things are meant to be. And when you think about what's happening, especially in Western culture, the culture wars, the battle over our very civilization, these battles are often rooted in differing views of those creational norms. So example, marriage. The Bible teaches that creational norm is one man, one woman, married for life in a monogamous relationship. The world is saying, no, we want to redefine that creational norm. We don't accept God's description or definition. We want to define it for ourselves. We want to choose a way that seems right to us. Well, if Christians do not possess a public theology that is adequate to defend God's creational norms, and I would argue that's what's happened in the United States, is the church did not possess an adequate theology to defend those creational norms in a robust and thoughtful way. We end up losing those creational norms, and society and culture suffer as a result. So the Colson Ctr is really committed to helping the church rediscover this full-orbed theology that not only addresses our personal relationship with God and the benefits to ourselves, but also the public aspect of the inauguration of God's rule and reign upon the earth, that we are to serve as his ambassadors and discipling the nations. It's interesting that Jesus uses that corporate term, the nations, rather than discipling individuals, but disciple the nations, disciple societies, teaching them to obey all that Christ has commanded. And then if we understand from a worldview perspective that all that Christ commands incorporates those four relationships with God, with self, with others, and creation, then we begin to develop a rich and robust worldview that makes us suitable for the fulfillment of the cultural mandate or the Great Commission.
So I'm assuming, Colson Ctr has been to decades educating, I have been the Centurion program. This is amazing. Doctors, judges, and professors, and from all kinds of, Christian leaders and grassroots, family, join, Colson Ctr program. Do you see that it made an impact and things are coming back?
It is. And especially today, as we were talking before we got started, that, sometimes it's difficult to convince American Christians to take seriously the development or formation of a consciously Christian worldview, because we tend to treat that as an optional part of our faith, or as I would say, an elective. You go to college and you take those elective courses that you don't need to graduate, right? So we tend to treat it as an elective of the Christian faith, not something essential. But with the changes that have taken place in our culture, the church, for the first time, is finding itself being pressed by the culture in ways that it has never experienced in Western civilization, except maybe in the early days of Rome. First time.
Wow.
And so now Christians are starting to ask questions such as, how do I understand the times in which we are living and know how to live faithfully in those times? So these are questions that American Christians are being confronted with for the first time, for sure.
Since you are taking the lead of a Colson Fellow program, Could you share a little bit what is the Colson Fellow Program?
Yeah, so the Colson Fellows Program is really our flagship program. So at the Colson Ctr, we have a number of programs, avenues, resources whereby we try to teach Christians how they ought to think about a particular cultural, social, moral issue from a consciously Christian perspective. The Colson Fellows Program is our intensive effort to equip people with the ability to know how to think. So they can cultivate this ability that the Bible describes as wisdom, in which they can discern for themselves what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. So it's giving them that analytical skill to look at the culture and discern what conforms to God's truth, what stands in opposition to God's truth. To date, we have educated a little over 2,000 men and women, a little over 2,500 men and women. This year, we have 750 men and women in the program. This is our largest class ever. And again, I think that is in response to the pretty dramatic cultural changes that we are seeing in the United States.
So is it a regular class or seasonal seminars? What kind of format are you using?
Yeah, so it's a 10-month course. It starts every July. Students participate either through one of our regional cohorts. We have 60 regional cohorts scattered around the United States. We do have 11 international cohorts. The nearest to China would be in South Korea and India. We have international cohorts there. And you meet each month. You access the curriculum via our learning platform online. And then you meet with your fellow learners in these small cohorts to really verbally process what it is that you're studying and learning, because it's a very intensive course.
Right. Wow. So, we would love to work with the Colson Ctr, work with you to set up a Chinese cohort program.
That would be wonderful.
It doesn't matter where they are, so.
That's right. Yeah, that would be just a tremendous blessing, both to us as well as the church in China, I believe.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one more question I have. I should ask this question at the very beginning. I forgot to ask you, and we just jump into the conversation. Share a little bit about your background so people understand where your biblical worldview coming from.
Yeah. Well, I spent most of my adult career in business. I was a corporate CEO up until 2001. And just prior to that time, I, like many Christians in this country, was becoming increasingly concerned about the state and direction of our culture. And more specifically, the apparent inability of the church in America to do anything about this cultural decline. And years earlier, I had been introduced to the works of men like Francis Schaeffer and Chuck Colson and others. And so I was aware that there was this historic past. There was this time in the past in the Western Church where we cultivated these brilliant thinkers, scholars, that thought deeply about every aspect of life and reality through the lens of a Christian, consciously Christian worldview, and help define how we ought to think about these categories of life or these creational norms and how we ought to work toward the establishment and preservation of these norms for the glory of God. And yet I looked at my generation and this intellectual strength and ability seemed to have dissipated almost entirely. And so that really personally motivated me to study and read and learn and grow. And so I ended up leaving the business world and went into vocational ministry, where I wrote, taught, spoke, challenging the theological vacuity of the church, the cultural indifference of the church through serious research, writing, teaching, speaking, trying to help Christians understand where we departed the right way, in the hopes that if we understood where we went wrong, those might be the first steps in getting back on track to being faithful followers of Jesus Christ. And so I did that for 20 years. I joined the Colson Ctr 3 years ago Had a long relationship with Chuck Colson and John Stone Street. Have enormous respect for the Colson Center. They were always the gold standard, as it were, in terms of worldview formation, worldview education.
Right.
And they asked me to come in and take over the Colson Fellows program, the goal being to really grow it to reach more and more people.
Right.
And so we re-engineered the way we deliver it, and we went from 4 years, we had 124 students in the program to, as I said earlier, we have 750 students in the program this year. And next year, we're launching a church affiliate program that will allow churches in the U.S. to host and lead their own Colson Fellows cohorts within their churches, led by their leadership or members of their congregation, providing them this rigorous resource for the development and formation of their people in public theology.
Wow, I'd love to partner with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
We would love
thank
that.
you. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.